Ambassador Michèle Boccoz, welcome to the Manila Times. How are you, madam?
Very well. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to come and join you tonight.
Our pleasure. I know you're very busy, but I guess on top of that, you're also preparing for our president's upcoming visit to France. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how the preparations are going, and maybe just maybe what are the general discussion points that you think will be taken up. What are you working on that trip?
Well, actually, we have very clear guidelines that have been given to us by our two presidents. As you know, they had several conversations already,
Yes.
and they met twice. They met in September last year in the margins of the UN General Assembly, and then they met again in the margins of the APEC
APEC.
summit in
Did they
Bangkok.
meet each other at the? I know that President Macron was at the coronation of King Charles. I don't know if they had a chance to.
I'm not sure because
Okay.
I
There were so
didn't.
many people. Yeah.
There were many people, and I
Yeah.
think the time was relatively short. They probably had just a handshake,
Yes.
and I don't think that they really had time to go into the details. But actually, they agreed on 4 priority areas
Okay.
for the enhanced partnership between our two countries. One of them is defense and security strategic issues, I would say, especially the maritime sector, which is a very important area for our cooperation. And the second area is around, all those new issues that are, they're not really new, but Ukraine situation made some of them perhaps more urgent, like food security
Right.
and food sovereignty in a sense. And this is one of the areas we're working on. And the second one, or the third one, I should say, rather, being energy security. And this is also our sovereignty, and it's also very important in terms of more independence and perhaps looking for new sources of energy. And the fourth area we're working on is really global public goods, in particular everything linked to climate change, the impact of climate change, what to do for it, biodiversity, and those global issues, oceans, of course, that are so important. So these are 4 areas really that are our roadmap into preparing the visit.
So that's still pushing ahead in June, or
We don't have a date.
you don't have a date? Okay.
Our president sent a letter of invitation to
Right.
President Marcos Jr.
But that's the window, because my
And-
reporters are, I think, clamoring to be on that trip. I think they very much want to go to France to cover the president's trip.
Well, yes,
I can't blame them.
we'll be very happy to host as many people in France, of course. But we have to wait until, of course, we get an official response so far as the date is concerned. And
Right.
I understand the president has just been traveling to the US, to the UK, and of
Right.
course the very important
The
ASEAN
ASEAN,
summit,
yes.
of course. So there are many important trips,
Right.
and so we will see when we can have a date. But we're really looking forward to these high-level meetings.
Right. I'm sure. Will there be a business delegation with the president, because he normally travels with some businessmen? Is that going to be the case?
Well, that is
also in France?
that is an important. Yeah, of course, it's a very important area,
Okay.
and it's a state visit. It's really the highest level of visits, 'cause we can have sort of working visits, we can have official visits, and state visits,
Okay.
which has a lot more protocol also around it
Okay.
into meeting our authorities. But definitely, there's always for us an economic dimension, and we would certainly expect a business delegation. Our French businessmen are very keen on meeting again with their Filipino counterparts. We had a mission of our largest employers association in France called MEDEF, the largest French companies, and they came here at the end of October last year.
Oh,
So there
okay.
was a very fruitful visit. It was
It's a trade mission, or?
It was not really trade. It was large companies looking
I
perhaps
see.
towards investment or partnerships in the
I
Philippines,
see.
like companies like Total Energy, like
Total.
Colas, like Alstom, like very large French companies.
Right.
And it was organized by the Makati Business Club.
I see.
And so they arranged also a number of contacts with with high-level authorities here in the Philippines. So that was also a way to interact a bit more. So we would expect this would continue. We will have anyway our Joint Economic Committee in June also, with the Secretary Pasquale traveling to participate in that. So we do hope that this will create more business opportunities.
Right.
But on the whole, we have many more companies, French companies here, and some of them have really very large projects that are developing now where they're playing an important role in infrastructure, transport, for example, but also renewable energy and many, many other areas.
Is there anything you can share? I mean, that's a little bit more concrete. Which French companies are keen on doing something?
Well, there are, for example, contracts that have been signed recently for, there's a consortium with two large French companies, Alstom and Colas Rail, and it is on the north-south commuter. It's
railway.
A very, very large railway, yes, very large
okay.
contract, and they're doing all the electromechanic part of it. This is very, very important, very large project. Colas Rail was also on another project with another two companies, Thales and Aegis, on the underground metro for Manila, also for the electromechanic part. So these are more than €1 billion, nearly €2 billion contract for one of them. So it's really quite big. We have companies like Total Energy. They're going to develop a solar farm in Isabela province. It's going to be built in 2 phases, but in total, in the end, it would be 440 megawatts, which is really very, very large project.
That sounds impressive.
These are completely new.
Right.
They just happened in the last few months. So that's really stepping up. But we've had companies that have been there for a long time, and they continue being present and active in the Philippines in construction sector, in BPOs as well, like Teleperformance, in shipping, like CMA CGM, for example, or Bolloré, and we have companies producing here like Essilor, we have Schneider. So there's a really large variety. I think we have about 130 French companies present in the Philippines at the moment. And it's really growing.
Wow. You mentioned energy cooperation. That's something that the Philippines needs. And I know your country's a leader in that sector, particularly nuclear energy, that the government seems. Is there any discussion there to maybe explore some collaboration on that front, maybe some French nuclear power technology? Is that something that's on the table? Or?
Yes, absolutely. That is part of the roadmap I was mentioning, energy between our two presidents, and we're looking at green energy, which can be renewable or nuclear. Okay. So in renewable energy, there are some projects like the one I mentioned in Isabela, the solar one. There is a very innovative project from a French company called Hydrogène de France, Hydrogen of France, and they're doing a project in Mindanao, in Zamboanga, Sibugay province. And this is using solar energy to the best, because solar energy is very good energy, but it's intermittent. And they have developed a technique for storage with hydrogen, and that allows to have a stable full-time solar
so
energy.
You can have a 24-hour.
So they can store energy, and then then can release it.
At nighttime,
Yes, at nighttime, exactly. So, and we organized recently a study tour with some Filipino companies and also business people or parliamentarians and others to Singapore, where we have a demonstration site of French companies on green energies, renewable energies, very innovative. So we took them there in, I think, in March. And now we are working on building a study tour to France on nuclear energy, where we would be also inviting the different partners. And that would cover all the aspects that you need to take into account to develop nuclear energy. Because, of course, you have to create the framework first in terms of the laws you have to put into place. If you need to be compliant with the Atomic Energy Agency based in Vienna. So they have a number of specific rules. So you need to create the framework for that, which needs the Parliament and the House and the Senate to create this kind of framework. Actually, there were discussions about that when the Senate visited France in October last year. And they visited also one of our nuclear power plants, Flamanville, which is one of the French big nuclear power plants. So the study tour would be on those aspects, the regulatory framework, also creating a nuclear safety agency, because this is also a prerequisite, about creating the research environment and training people, and looking at the different technologies. Because, of course, we have the traditional very large nuclear power plants, but now there are also the technologies which are much more flexible with the smart nuclear reactor, the modular reactors, which can be very small to rather large. And this can be more adjusted to an archipelago
Right, the
structure
smaller
where you can
islands,
have
yeah.
smaller.
Yeah.
And those smaller reactors they are easier to manage because you don't have to build an enormous framework,
I
like
see.
a big shell like we used to be able to do in the past. Actually, you don't build them, you assemble them, as a matter of
I
fact,
see.
and all the elements are brought together. So that's a technology we're developing with our EDF, our Électricité de France, our major company in France. At the moment, in France, 70% of our electricity is produced by nuclear energy, 27% is produced by renewable energy, hydroelectricity, solar, wind, and other. And we were only dependent 3% on gas, which is why it was easier for a country like France to react after the Ukraine crisis to,
Right.
of course, no longer receiving Russian gas in particular.
Right. Well, I want to ask you about that later, but just before I leave the topic on the economic relations, I know all of our neighbors are looking, at France and other countries to attract trade and investments. How are we doing compared to our neighbors? I mean, in terms of attracting French businesses, where are we doing well, and where should we be looking to improve?
Well, I think there's a lot of interest in the Philippines. It was
Okay.
not necessarily a very traditional country for France to work with in the region.
Right.
Many of our companies were more used to working with Vietnam,
Because
for
of the
example,
history.
because of history,
Yeah.
of course, or Singapore for other reasons,
Yes.
for example. But now there's development in other ASEAN countries, Malaysia or Indonesia. But the Philippines are really going very high on the list, and there's a lot of interest. There's been a number of reforms recently in terms of allowing foreign companies to have more ownership,
Sure.
or to be or opening certain sectors also for foreign investment, and this is also an incentive. And then the Philippines is a very dynamic economy.
Right.
You have a very high growth rate, probably the highest in the ASEAN region. And of course, our companies see that. There's also very good quality workers because people speak English also, and that's really an asset. So many of our companies are really interested in now getting to know the Philippines better, trying to come and see what the market is like, looking for partnerships. Many of them like to work with partnership of some Filipino companies because they enter a new market, and it's always
Right.
easier if you enter it with a partner. So we have visits of companies coming over, and we have MEDEF, but we have also other companies coming, through different structures from Business France, which is another of our trade agencies in the government. They would bring more medium-sized companies. MEDEF would be the largest ones. So there's a mix, in fact, at
Right.
different levels. And I think the Philippines are really becoming a very, very attractive
Is there something
market.
else that maybe the government could do? I mean, it's been in office only for barely a year now, but it's, based on the feedback you've been hearing from some of the French companies visiting the Philippines, is there something more that they would like to see? Because Filipinos have a lot of anxiety with regard to Vietnam, because Vietnam is doing very well. You mentioned the Philippines, but Vietnam is right at our heels, and some people say might be overtaking the Philippines also. And
I think an asset for the Philippines, something that would probably be very attractive to company, is to have more like e-administration and more simplified administration, because there are a lot of administrative hurdles till some time,
Right.
and I think they would be happy to have
see more improvement on the.
well, make things lighter, easier,
Yes.
faster would be, I think, an asset, and
Yes.
they would be happier to work in this kind of
And
environment.
because in Vietnam, I mean, you have I think they have the advantage of having the same policies, since they became independent. So that seems to attract
Well, and then
certain investors. Yeah.
we had so much interaction for so many years, so they know very much of the French administration, and part of their the way they work is closer to the way we work. So it's probably more familiar immediately for a French company. The Philippines is more American style, but
Yeah.
our companies are used to work everywhere around the world. So it's not a major issue. But if you're asking what kind of thing would they like to have, I think simpler and quicker would be, they would all
a
be
plus
very
for- I think
happy
that's-
with.
I think
of course.
everyone wants that. What about direct link connections? Are there any talks about air links, air agreements?
Oh, we'd love to have, of course, direct flights
Yes,
to
I think that would be
Paris.
a basic thing that we should be working on, right?
Yes, I think that would be really very helpful because obviously at the moment whatever we do, you would have to have a stopover somewhere, and so it
Right.
makes the trip longer. And
Right.
having direct connections would really be helping very, very much our bilateral
Convenience and
relations.
cost,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
So we see with a lot of pleasure that Philippine Airlines has decided to buy 9 A350
Wow.
Airbus aircraft. So we're very happy with that. We have a very good connection and discussion with the airlines here, and so we hope that we will maybe have a direct link to Paris. That would be extremely helpful and much appreciated.
Well, I think a lot of Filipinos would love that. You mentioned security cooperation a while ago, and you were also mentioning Ukraine. We were talking before we started that there will be a new officer at your embassy, military attaché. Is that representative of a change in policy, or this was just a matter of filling up that position?
Well, I think there are different aspects. First of all, we have an Indo-Pacific strategy now.
Okay.
Because this region is much higher in the priorities, not only of France, but of Europe in general.
I see.
So we started building up this strategy a few years ago. Then other EU members like Germany or the Netherlands also built their strategy, and we decided it would be better to have an EU strategy, which was published a year and a half ago, actually, and shows how important it is. It is probably even more important for France because we are a nation of the Indo-Pacific, because we have our territories in the Pacific, in New Caledonia, in French Polynesia, and in Wallis and Futuna, but also in the Indian Ocean with La Réunion and Mayotte and others. So we definitely are there. We certainly are the only European country, EU country, to have our armed forces in the Pacific, because we have this French population there, and we have a large navy in French Polynesia and New Caledonia. So we are present also, and we have port calls, for example, here on a regular basis, and an excellent cooperation with the Philippines. So definitely this is a trend that has been going on for a while, and we are also raising the level of our cooperation with the Philippines in general. So I'm going to have more staff joining the embassy from this summer. We're going to have
And you're going to have a new office.
and we're going to move to new offices. So hopefully maybe September, or if we can, that would be great, because the new team is going to come. So we will have a larger political chancery. We will have also more in our cultural department and cooperation department, and so on. And we're also going to host our military armament attaché. We had somebody based in Malaysia, but it was not really convenient considering that the Philippines are becoming a more and more important partner, and so we will have somebody joining us this summer.
Right. Where does the Philippines figure in that Indo-Pacific policy of France? Because of course, China must be everyone's center of attention, but ASEAN is also a major partner, and but there are many players in ASEAN. Well, where does the Philippines fit in?
Well, ASEAN is for us very important partner, because you always talk here centrality of ASEAN, which I think is a reality. I mean, also geographically, because of the positioning, and our contacts with this region are more and more important. I mean, a lot of the world trade, of the world navigations goes through this region, and it is a strategic region in terms of economic development for all the rest of the world, and that's really, really important. So I think the Philippines and the ASEAN partners are quite at the heart of it, and they are quite important. The development of the relations with the ASEAN, and specifically with the Philippines, is definitely a priority for us. I mean, obviously, everybody talks about China, and what we said is one of the specificity of our Indo-Pacific strategy, I mean French or EU, which are very close, of course, very aligned, is that we try to have a more perhaps nuanced relationship with China, non-confrontational, as we call it.
That was a pretty interesting contrast with President Macron's visit to Beijing and the EU President Ursula's statements. Or maybe media was just playing too much of it there. You were
Yes,
talking earlier, but there's really not much difference in.
no, there's no. I don't think that there is difference. I
Yeah.
think we are along the same line. I think we all say that we don't want to go on the confrontational mode with China.
Okay.
We know that there are areas where we are indeed in a mode where we're not in cooperation, but there are areas where we know we have to work with China. If you take global themes like climate change issues, for example, we definitely need to work together.
Yes.
I know that there are areas where there's competition, trade competition, industrial competition, and there are areas where, of course, we really don't see eye to eye, and we are completely clear about that. I think there's been some interpretation of some of the
A spin.
a sort of spin on what the president said, because
Yeah.
some of his words were taken out of context, and of
Yes.
course they sounded like they were a bit different.
Right.
But we're very much aligned with the EU on the same position in terms of course, the One China policy remains. There's absolutely no change to that or to our position vis-à-vis Taiwan. It's completely aligned and it's completely the same. And so I don't think that there is any difference or any divergence of views on this aspect.
And how does France assess China? In security terms. I mean, is there a concern, or that's I think that's where some of the difference was coming out, where France was a little bit more, seemingly more open to engage China, whereas some of the others were talking about decoupling.
Yes, I think our president's vision is that you should talk, because
Right.
basically if you don't talk, you completely stop the dialogue and you don't really make the situation any
Right.
easier. So it's for him always better to engage and to
Right.
engage in conversations, even if you disagree, that
Right.
at least you can talk about it. Well, definitely for us, what is important is a rules-based international order, and that's what we defend whoever we talk to, and that's what our president defended also when he talked to his counterpart in China. We support very much the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. We support the Arbitral Award 2016. And there is absolutely, of course, no change in that. This is a very, very strong aspect of our policy.
Right.
We've always supported it. We continue to support it. And of course, we believe very much in democracy, democratic principles,
Right.
and respect of the democratic principles.
Right.
The UN Charter, that remains for us the foundation of international relations.
Right.
So that's what we're really trying to push and promote.
Right. Well, President Macron was also, I think, willing to at least consider China. You mentioned Ukraine, but he seemed willing to entertain the idea of a Chinese proposal for peace in Ukraine. But that's one of those things that you said that may have been taken out of context.
Yes, because at the moment there's been some discussions, as you know, between
Yes.
China and Russia. We certainly don't know everything
Right.
of what has been said. I mean, these conversations are always confidential, of course. We haven't really seen a plan, or we haven't really seen anything.
There's nothing
completely-
else that
Not
came
for-
out after that initial.
Not for the moment, so
Yes.
we don't really see anything.
Yeah.
And we are, of course, watching the situation very carefully. We are supporting Ukraine.
Right.
We're supporting politically. We're supporting financially. We're also supporting through weapons as well,
Right.
like the other countries in Europe, like the US. And they're very bravely defending their countries and
Right.
defending democratic principles. So we're fully supporting them.
Right. Well, from our perspective, it doesn't seem like there's any resolution anytime soon in the Ukraine. But what's your view from Europe? How do the French people look at it?
Well, we are considering the situation now. It looks like we are at a bit of a stalemate,
Right.
and it will certainly take time before we come to a time when perhaps a change and evolution of the situation is
Right.
going to come. So we don't really expect much change.
And
at
how
the
much
moment.
impact do you think that will have on the economic outlook of Europe, or has Europe sort of recovered, because it's been a year now? I mean, there's been some adjustments made, but
There's been a lot of adjustment made, and there's been a lot of solidarity also within
Right.
Europe in trying to weather this crisis. Because of course it was a bit of a shock. I mean, some European countries are very dependent on Russian gas, were
Right.
very dependent on Russian gas, and they had to reshuffle and reorganize. So obviously there were a lot of fears about how they're going to spend, how's the winter going to be spent, how they're going to cover the energy needs for that. There was a lot of solidarity. We shared, for example, a lot of our electricity with our neighbors, also trying to make sure that we try to be as balanced as possible and supportive of each other. I think this crisis has, in a sense, brought Europe even closer together in terms of the reactions, voting the sanctions, implementing the sanctions, and being closer economically, trying to be more tightly knit so that we help each other in going through that difficult spot. And now things are getting, in a sense, better in terms of energy supply, in terms of food security as well. Situation is going to get better. But we will still need to continue carrying this effort for some time, obviously.
Would you say that the adjustments have been sufficient to maybe insulate Europe's economy in case the war in Ukraine goes on for the foreseeable future?
Well, there is a toll, of course, on Europe, and of course it makes people's life more difficult. Lots of people have been faced with inflation. Some of our colleagues in Central Europe are closer, and they're probably in a harder and tougher situation with their people being more affected by inflation, by the rise in prices. So it means that there are sacrifices that are made by the Europeans, and I'm afraid that is going to continue for a while, because we're not going to be able to weather the whole crisis without consequences. But I think that there's a very strong will to continue to support Ukraine, and this sort of helps also our politicians to carry on, in fact, because the population is very supportive. But of course there can be unrest in some cases because of simply the raise of the prices and the inflation and all the impact it has, access to energy and all of that.
All right. Well, we were talking about possible trade and investment partnerships. Do you think that because of that cloud hanging over Europe caused by the Ukraine-Russia crisis, is that going to, you think, impact on how much investments and trade will be pursued? Because as you said, there will be an economic toll, right?
Yeah, I don't think that's going to impact very much. I mean, if I look at the French companies, for example, some of them are really doing very well. If I look at the French economy, our president just released a message recently, I think it was yesterday, in terms of investment going to France. And for the fourth consecutive year, we are the European country that attracts more investment. One of the reasons being our cheap electricity, being the quality of our workers and things like that. So anyway, there are lots of decisions of investment in France of foreign companies. And our own companies are very dynamic. They're not only dynamic in the internal market, but they're very dynamic in the international market. And as I was telling you, I see many, many more coming to the Philippines, being interested in working in the Philippines and having partnerships here with the Philippines. So I still feel economic dynamism from our companies. They continue to be optimistic in terms of their development and very, very proactive.
And what about like security cooperation? I know there was a lot of issue about the lost sales of the French subs to Australia. Did you find a new market for that, or maybe is the Philippines looking to buy any subs?
Well, there's been a lot of conversations with Australia, of course, and even though the situation was a little bit tense.
We seem to be in the market for a lot of military equipment these days.
Yes, there is definitely an increase in military investment, that's for sure. And yes, there are different markets, and we are still active around the world. There are of course a lot of discussions in the Philippines, but our cooperation is broader than. I mean, we're not there to sell. We are there to really put into place a cooperation, and we've had a long-term cooperation at defense level. We've had a lot of Philippine officers being trained in France. We regularly have a Philippine officer, very often the Navy, but not always, being in our war school, war college, defense college. spending a full year there,
Wow.
working with our officers. So there's a lot of interaction. We have a lot of also working on exercises, together. Like we had sort of drills in recently New Caledonia called Southern Star in terms of HADR, for example, with our Coast Guards, but also some Navy. We were invited also to participate in Balikatan as observers this year, for example. And of course, we're going to have this port call of a frigate at the end of June and another one mid-July. So we will be also conducting exchanges. We work also on some projects on the European level, like Crimerio, for example, which is exchange of data, in which we've been collaborating with the Philippines. There's been exercises going on, and there were some drills also. So we do have a sort of very broad cooperation, interaction between our armies, navies, mostly, with the Philippines. And of course, there's armament prospects. Obviously, they're talking about the submarine, because it's, of course, always the elephant in the room. There was a tender by the Filipino government, and of course, a French company proposed an offer. And we understand there's also a Korean company, and the French companies having made offers on this tender. And we've updated it recently upon the request of the Department of Defense. And of course, it will be the Filipino government decision on what they're going to do. I understand that there's still work going on Horizon 3, which is going to be covering the investment in that sector over the next few years. And so that's very much what the Philippine authorities will decide, of course, but we are interested whatever happens in continuing the collaboration.
Right.
We will have also a visit of our Rear Admiral Dandinier, who is the Joint Commander of the French forces in the Pacific. He will be spending 3 days in Manila also in June, interacting with his counterparts and having this kind of more strategic discussions.
Interesting. Now, you said you were invited, the French military was invited to join the Balikatan. I think Australia was part of it, but is that just a matter of timing, or is that going to happen on another occasion, or
well, that
or
I
maybe
cannot
a separate,
say. I cannot say. We've been invited to participate this year, and
I
so
see.
we're very happy to be also observers in this
Right.
exercise. And then the rest will depend on the Philippine forces on whether they want to invite us.
I see. Okay. Well, when those things happen, how, I guess, is there a concern that maybe, we're the wrong signal might be getting across China, because from the Philippines perspective, it's meant to for self-defense, but from China's view, it may be viewed as something different, right? So what would be what could be done, I think, to to not give the wrong message, right? Or maybe to reassure China that it's not meant to really suppress them or contain them, or
basically, I think that's a reason why our president visited China.
right.
It was to engage in dialogue and to have face-to-face discussions. And this is also what we call our strategy and the EU strategy non-confrontational, because we
Right.
don't want to go into a confrontational attitude. We know that there are areas when we don't see eye to eye,
Right.
obviously.
But that's not the totality of the relationship.
Exactly.
Right.
There are other areas where we can build and we do build a relationship. And of course, China is a big trade partner, and we continue having a lot of economic relations with China. So you have to balance, in fact, the different aspects of the relation and to keep the dialogues open. So that's our vision. That's the
Yeah.
European vision, which is probably offering a variety of ways of interacting. And we think it's good to keep those channels of communication open also, and to be able to keep this dialogue open. Because we may have divergences of views, but at least if we can talk to
Yeah.
each other, that's a way to sometimes diffuse tensions.
But does it worry France that maybe America's position is a bit more aggressive, or might seem more aggressive toward China? I mean, I was just listening to some of the statements coming from some of the ASEAN leaders, and Singapore's prime minister, for example, was talking about the major powers, referring, of course, to China and the U.S., should be behaving more responsibly in the region.
Well, we engage also into a lot of discussions with all our NATO partners, with the US, I mean, obviously, and we are comfortable talking to them, exchanging over that, and being able to discuss the different issues in a very open way.
So let's talk about your embassy. I mean, what are the major things that, of course, besides the visit of our president to France, hopefully in June, but what else is going on with your embassy?
Oh,
What are the
well.
big things that are going on this year?
Well, we've been very, very active last year, as you know, with
Yes.
celebrating the 75th anniversary
Yes.
of our bilateral relations. So definitely we've tried to do a lot in a number of very, very diverse areas to showcase our relationship and also to start maybe working in different areas. So I think we're going to continue doing our cultural activities. We are planning to have again some very important cultural moments like Fête de la Musique at the end of June. Fête de la Musique is always very popular, and so we will have again this year a very big party at the end of June for that. So that would be a very important moment, I would think. And then we will have other activities in October. Again, we will have the French Film Festival. We'll probably try to have another French chef coming, like we had Alain Passat coming last year, and probably some French actors coming over. So we're still continuing this kind of dialogue. That's what we call, in a sense, soft diplomacy. But I think it's really important for us because it's a foundation of our relation. It's people-to-people relation.
Right.
You know, it's bringing people together. It's really having creating those more personal links in a sense, and we think we're very close together in sense, French and Philippine in terms of culture. We both love a number of areas like food. Certainly, food is important in
Absolutely.
both our countries.
Yes.
And also singing. We love singing. You love singing even more than we do, and you're probably much better than we are. And sports. You love basketball. We are on football, but we also have very good basketball teams.
Yes.
So we interact in a number of areas. So culture is not only culture in the proper sense of the term, but it's really creating this people-to-people relation in a number of activities that bring us together. I think that's really very important. And then we will be continuing working, of course, in the economic dimension, and there will be projects that will continue. We'll continue supporting French companies that are interested in the Philippines. This is certainly an area where things are moving very, very fast with a lot of interest, as I said, from our companies. So this is something we will be also continuing. We work a lot on environmental and climate change issues, the global issues, because we think the Philippines is a particularly important partner. You are very much affected by climate change,
Sure.
and you have an incredible biodiversity, which is threatened. One of the areas France is really focusing upon is the oceans dimension, trying to save the oceans. So we organized one ocean summit in Brest on the coast of Brittany in France February last year. Then we worked a lot with our ocean conference that took place in Palau last year. And we're going to host the next UN conference on the oceans jointly with Costa Rica in 2025. So this is a very long trend of our cooperation. And this is an area where we work a lot with the Philippines. I had the opportunity to talk to Secretary Yulo Loizaga on these issues, DNR, and we see really eye to eye in terms of how we can cooperate and work better together. That's really important. We work a lot on also science and
you were just at
research.
DOST. Is there
Yes.
something cooking there that we should know about?
Oh, well, nothing cooking, but it's we would really like to be able to restart more exchanges of students, but also scientists and other. We used to have a more active cooperation, but of course it was slowed down by the pandemic.
Right.
Now it's beginning to start again, but we would like to increase it and we'd like to make it concrete. Also building on not only scientific contacts, but going into projects and innovation and supporting innovation together. So this is an area, again, it's people to people, it's bringing the students, the young people together.
Right.
And that's really helping us to get to know each other better, to get to work better.
Right.
And one very important message for students that I would like to use your channel also to give to everybody is, you don't need to speak French to go and study in France.
Okay.
Because we have a lot of programs that are in English as
Okay.
well. So there's no barrier for language, and our universities are very open to welcome Filipino students
Wow. Okay.
and would be very, very
I think
glad
a lot of
to
people
welcome them.
would love to take up on that opportunity.
So we have some scholarships as well, and we have ways to help us as students. So we're very open to that. So please, if you're interested, contact our embassy, come to see us.
Is there information on your website for students
Yes.
who are interested in studying in
Yes,
France?
we put information on our
Okay.
website, and we have very good news because we're going to have our university attaché who's going to join us very, very soon. He's finalizing the administrative démarche, including visas, but he should be here maybe across fingers next week. So we will have somebody who'd be
Well,
devoted
if
to
you have
that.
visitors from France and they have their if they're willing to talk to media, and please keep us in mind. And if their schedule will allow it, we know we could do an interview like this and maybe talk about their particular purpose for visiting Manila.
Definitely, with
Yeah.
great pleasure. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely.
Is there a particular industry you're talking about? A lot of economic cooperation. Is there a particular industry that you think is ripe for French-Philippine partnership? You mentioned green energy was one thing but is that it, or is there something else that you think
Oh no,
it's a low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, there are many areas. I know that there's we were talking about infrastructure as well. There's a huge potential for infrastructure. Talking about energy, yes, there are new energy sources, but there's also energy efficiency. We have many French companies working on that, and I think that's a very, very good way of saving energy in an easy way. But there is also tourism. There is
Tourism is something that we can learn a lot from France.
well, we
You
used
have
to have
like 40 million or so
Oh no!
arrivals a year? Or?
Before COVID, I think the highest number we hit was 95 million
Oh, wow.
tourists,
Wow.
which is really huge. I think we were the
Yes.
first tourist destination in the world,
Wow.
and definitely we're very happy to talk about tourism with the Philippines. You have a wonderful country. For me, it's the most beautiful country, and it's so rich and so diverse.
But what do the French like? I mean, I'm sure there are many places that they can visit. But if the Philippines were promoting tourism, what would appeal to the French traveler?
Well, many things appeal to French travel. I would say scuba diving in the Philippines
diving,
is
okay.
absolutely, it's
Okay.
fascinating. And the Philippines were participating in our scuba diving fair in Paris. And I
Okay.
think they were the top most attractive country for the visitors.
Really?
Because
Wow.
of the diversity of what you can offer, the fantastic landscape, the diversity of islands. It's absolutely amazing, I must say. It's really, really beautiful. I must say I had a personal experience. I wasn't scuba diving, but I was snorkeling
Okay.
in Coron.
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
that was something absolutely magic. It was swimming with a dugong.
Oh wow. Okay.
That was an incredible experience. So beautiful, and the marine also variety, and those beautiful landscape like Barracuda Lake or Twin Lagoons, or these rock gardens or coral gardens. I saw turtles, so many fish, and all that. And that's my own very, very limited experience because I'm not an expert there. But French people are very attracted by that. But also the diversity of the islands.
Okay.
Also the food scene, which is becoming one reason why
Food
people
tourism is, I
travel.
think, becoming,
Food tourism, yes.
Yeah.
And we are really trying to get the Philippine food
That's
scene
where
better known.
more cooperation should happen.
Yes, maybe with Michelin. I mean, they're important partners in France for that. Michelin Guide is a bit of our what people follow when they travel also.
Sure,
So
sure.
that's why not an area for cooperation.
What kind of image would you like to, would you like Filipinos to have when they think of France? Of course, a lot of people, Filipinos probably think of Paris, but France is more than just Paris. What should come to our minds when they think of your country? You think
What would I like them to think of, or what do they think of?
that you would like them to think of
Um,
when they think of France? What would you like for Filipinos to think about when
Well,
you mention France?
again, people-to-people interaction, and perhaps having built projects together, and the students, the young generation going to France, getting to know, getting to make friends, and to create this long-term relationship is very important. But I would be very happy also to have Filipino tourists going to other parts of France they may not know yet, because there's so many wonderful places I'm sure they'd love. Because I understand the main two destinations for Filipino tourists at the moment are Paris, of course, is number one, and Lourdes for
because of the religious
pilgrimage.
Yes.
But there are so many other beautiful places, and it can be the coast on the Mediterranean. It can be the very different Atlantic coast. There can be beautiful places like Mont Saint-Michel, which is one of my favorite places in France. It's this abbey on an island in the middle of the bay in Brittany. Well, no, actually, it's in Normandy. Sorry, it's just at the border between the two. But this is a very sensitive issue, so I should attribute it to the right region.
Is that the island that becomes, it becomes the road is submerged when there's high tide?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Now the tide flow has been reestablished, because it was a little bit damaged, but now it's been completely rehabilitated. And indeed, you can only go at low tide, and at high tide you have to go by boat. And it's an absolutely magic place with beautiful abbey built in the Middle Ages. It's absolutely amazing place. But there are many others. My region, of course, I would promote.
Where are you from in France?
From the Alps region. And so I would promote the skiing and hiking in the mountains. So France has a very, very large diversity of landscape. You can go to Strasbourg in the east, where you have this beautiful city with on little canals, and it's absolutely superb, and it's so diverse. So I would like the Philippines to get to know more about the diversity of France. Like I would like to have French people coming over and get to understand the diversity of the Philippines as well. Like, I don't know, I've been to Banaue, for example, to visit the rice terraces. This is just amazing. I mean, it's a natural landscape, but it's also the human construction of it. And those hundreds and hundreds of years of people building that kind of landscape and what it is today. So these are definitely places I would like French people to know more about and to discover.
Have you tried Filipino? Have you tried Filipino food much? I mean, you had the opportunity.
Yes, I have tried.
Do you think it will appeal to French palate?
Yes, definitely. Yes, absolutely. I had friends visiting recently, and they wanted to try Filipino food. So they decided to try lumpia. They decided to try pancit. They decided to try adobo and lechon, of course.
And how do you think we can? How do you think we can make more French people think about the Philippines when they think of Asia? Because when they think of Asia, of course, there's China, and a lot of people go to Thailand, right? I mean, what do you think we can do maybe to attract more attention from French people?
Well, we have a lot of fairs on tourism. So Philippines participation is very important, because you can showcase the beauties of the Philippines and the diversity of the experiences you can have there. That's a good point. Again, people to people is good, because also word of mouth, when people have been there and they talk to their friends, and so that's also a good way of promoting. But I have a feeling that if you look at the destinations, top destination, the sort of bucket list for people, where would they like to go? In France, the Philippines is going really much higher on the list, because I had a number of people asking and just asking where to go, what to do, and it seems that the interest in the Philippines is really rising.
Well, I hope that. Is there anything else that that I forgot to ask that you'd like to mention? That thing about the scholarship is quite interesting, and I think a lot of that's something maybe we'd like to highlight as well.
Yes, we would definitely like to have many more students, both French students coming here and Filipino students going to France, so that this new generation also gets to know each other and each other's countries much better, because this is really the most solid foundation for our future. And there's a lot of opportunities in many areas. For example, we're trying to look also on how to develop more scientific relations, bringing young people, but also in terms companies with innovation. And we would like to invite, Philippine university students, but also scientists, and also perhaps some startup companies, innovative companies like the health tech companies or agri-tech companies.
If there's an opportunity for cooperation in media, I know the French media is also
of course
quite quite active, and they have a lot of things I think we can learn from as well.
Yes, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs usually organizes exchanges between journalists, and we have programs for journalists in Paris. You're most welcome to come
Oh, well,
and visit.
and keep us in mind if there are journalists coming to the Philippines and they want to maybe see how things are done here, and we'd love to cooperate with them as well.
Definitely. I will absolutely think of putting you in touch with them and making sure that these interactions happen.
Well, Ambassador, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very, very much. I was very happy to have this opportunity to have a conversation with you, and definitely happy to follow up with you also anytime.
Okay.
Thank you so much.